Hello everyone. Hello. Oh gosh, that's good. Hi folks. Welcome to this talk. Amenhotep and Akhenaten, favorite subjects for me, a favorite subject for many of you, no doubt. We're going to start the talk in about 10 minutes time. I tried to make sure that I was online at exactly 10 to 6 as promised. For anybody who's watching the recording and isn't interested in these 10 minutes or so of preliminaries, please skip forward to 10 minutes. You'll find the talk itself starts around then. All these things I have to think about these days now that I've changed the way I do my online talks. This YouTube broadcast thing is presented a number of issues for me to navigate. Anyway, that's one of them. So thank you very much for coming. I can see there's already what looks like a zillion people in the chat. Hello, all of you. And in particular, hello and welcome and thank you to all those of you who have joined the channel as Alabaster members. I really appreciate your support. This is a free talk. So it doesn't require a subscription. Anybody can join, but because this is a part of the way that I earn a living, this is why I've decided to go for this idea of setting up subscriptions. From September onwards, lectures like this one are going to be available only to channel subscribers. In what's going to be a new, slightly higher category, lapis level and gold level. Those two categories will be available from the beginning of September. So if you want to carry on watching these lectures and to have access to the back catalogue, as it were, then you need to become either a lapis or a gold member from September onwards. But for those people who want to get into the habit of being a subscriber, you can join at the basic alabaster level for now. That just allows you to send a little bit of support my way, and it gives you these special alabaster badges and emojis, which I can see some of you already using. So thanks so much if you've already become a member. If you're not a member, as I say, but you'd like to support what I do, you should find there's a little thanks button somewhere in the screen, somewhere beneath where I am. If you hit the thanks button, you'll see that you've got a variety of options for sending a little bit of money my way. It's a kind of YouTube version of the sort of buy me a coffee tip thingy. So whether you're watching live or watching via the recording, as I say, this is a part of the way I make a living. And I do put quite a lot of time and effort into these talks, if you can believe that from my scruffy slides and chaotic presentation. So yeah, all thanks, all contributions very welcome. So what else do I need to say? Oh yes, for those of you who are at my last talk on missing tombs, you may know, you may remember that there were a few audio issues during the live event and in the recording. Unfortunately, I wasn't really aware of those, or that they would be affecting everybody at the time I was giving the talk, but it seems obvious from the recording that they were. So I'm really sorry about that, and thank you to those of you who persevered and watched all the way to the end despite the audio issues. For those of you who found it intolerable, I'm really sorry. I have a few people suggested that I should maybe invest in a new mic. I haven't done that because I'm using the same microphone that I've been using for online lectures for a few years now, and it's never given me any problem. What was different last time was that I was using YouTube's broadcasting facility for the first time. So I suspect that was the issue, and I've been in touch with YouTube support about the audio issues. They've sent me about 4 or 5 emails saying, thanks, we've got your message, but no explanation or suggestions so far. So I have tested the audio in the last couple of days, and I don't seem to be getting any issues. So fingers crossed. As last time, if there are issues, I may not be aware of them while I'm actually giving the talk. So in which case, I'm just going to forge on ahead. I can only really apologise if you get those issues again, and to try and assure you that I will figure out a plan B for next time. There are a couple of other bits and bobs to do with the way that YouTube works that I have managed to resolve for this time, mostly to do with sort of behind the scenes stuff that you won't be able to see, but hopefully that will also mean that things will go slightly more smoothly. So one of the things actually I ought to do before we get going is just test out my slides, because I'm using different software to display my slides this time. So you should be able to see an image of well, the backdrop is Tel El Amarna. It's a photograph of Amarna taken from the area of the North Tombs, and in the foreground, statues of Amenhotep III on the left-hand side. One of my favourite statues, a lot of people's favourite statue. And Akhenaten on the right there. This is the first of 3 lectures I'm going to be giving this summer, as you may know. Here we go. Look, my slides are working. Yay! So the next one after today is going to be 7th of August, pyramid myth busting. This is going to be an opportunity for me to build on some of the stuff what was in a telly program that I was in with Dara O'Brien earlier this year, Mysteries of the Pyramids with Dara O'Brien, in which we took head on some of the conspiracy and other theories connected with the pyramids, and attempted to show why the consensus view pyramids were tombs of the Egyptian 4th dynasty is still the best explanation we have. What I want to do in this talk is to just go into a bit more detail than we could in the TV show. So that's coming up in August. That's going to be free. So again, free to anybody, but I'd really appreciate any contributions anyone watching that would like to make via the thanks button, again just below here. And then in September we're gonna have a look at how to read hieroglyphs. Specifically in the Abydos king lists. So in fact, the image in the foreground here is from the Temple of Ramesses II at Abydos, and the image behind is the Great King List from the Temple of Seti I at the same site. So we'll have a look at king lists and how to read a few royal names. That talk is going to be for Lapis and Gold members only. So if you want to watch that one, you'll need to join at those higher levels. We'll see how that goes. So got a couple of minutes before we get going. Again, if you're watching this 10 minutes or so of preliminaries and wondering what I'm doing, just gassing on and not actually giving you a talk about Amenhotep and Akhenaten, this of course is the established way of doing online lectures in Egyptology, established during the first lockdown, of a few minutes worth of chat and intro, and then we get on with the talk. And so actually, I really ought to go over to the chat and say hello to you all, hadn't I? So hello everyone. Hello, Erica. Thank you very much for joining as an Alabaster member. Hello, Deborah, who says if this is longer than an hour, I'll miss the last half as I have a training class. Oh, sorry to hear that, Deborah. Something else I should say is that the recording of this talk will be, I think, automatically available the moment I finish the stream. So if you do have to miss any of it, you'll be able to catch up as and whenever you want to. So you won't, of course, be able to post questions and comments. Not that I'll be able to answer during the session, but still, the talk itself will still be available. Hi, Myra or Mira, who's looking forward to watching this. Hello, Jamie. Hi, Jamie in Jersey. Just want to make sure this is 12:50 Eastern Standard Time. Oh, golly gosh, I'm not sure, Jamie. We're in British summertime at the moment, if that helps. 6 p.m. UK time, British summertime. Amy says, glad I have today off, otherwise I've missed the start of it. Me too, Amy. Hello, nice to see you again. Hello, Michael, amazing, and hello, and hi, Thori19. Welcome to Alabaster. Thank you for joining. Thank you so much. And Annette Telintum, also an Alabaster member. Thanks so much for joining, Annette. Really appreciate it. Sogar says, is this thing live? It may not have been when you posted the comment, but it is now. Oh yes, and Amy's pointed that out. So hello to you all. I'm going to have to get going with the talk, aren't I? Hello, Amy. Hello, Audrey. Hi. Good to meet you recently, Audrey, as well, in real life. Wow. Nice to think that that sort of thing's possible now. Hi, Bridget. Hello, Paula. Hello, Michael, Sarah, Judith, Chris, Bettina. Hi, Bettina. I owe you an email, I think, don't I? Kashava. Hi. Sarah, thanks for joining it as an Alabaster member. You. Yeah, hey. Oh, golly. I'm not going to get to the end of these. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming. So I'm going to get going, I think, and I'll come back to the chat, by the way, at the end. That's another thing. Anybody who's new to my talks will perhaps not know. Anybody who is familiar with my talks will know very well. I'll take questions at the end. So if you do have any questions, whenever you think of them, you can pop them into the chat. But I won't take them until the talk is finished. I will do my best to answer as many of those questions, comments, criticisms, suggestions as you have as we go along. Or the other thing I suppose I should say today is that there's the small matter of an England football match 2 hours after the start of this talk, so that is a hard cut-off for me. England versus the Netherlands, hoping England might play a bit better this time, even if they don't win. Anyway, let's see. Right, Amenhotep and Akhenaten. Let's get going. Before I get onto the substance of the talk, I just wanted to mention Professor Barry Kemp. Many of you will know Barry was the director of the very, very long-running research project at Tel el Amarna, the site of Akhenaten's capital city, Aten. That project began in 1977, and Barry had been the director ever since. He's one of the true greats of Egyptology and Egyptian archaeology, certainly in modern times. Laser focused on his work, tremendous publications track record. His research is really excellent, but he was also a tremendous communicator, really terrific writer. I had the privilege of editing some of his stuff for a book once, and with all due respect to all the other contributors to that book, his texts were just a joy. They were absolutely clean, clear, funny, brilliant. Everybody I think was a bit in awe of Barry, and I think we all thought that he was going to go on forever, and so it was a bit of a shock, even though he was 84 years old when he died a few weeks ago. It's impossible to think about the subject of today's lecture, Amenhotep III and Akhenaten, without thinking about Barry and the great work he's done, and inevitably I've drawn on his work in putting this presentation together. I feel very lucky to have known him at all, to have been able to work with him. I saw him last in October when this photograph was taken, when he was in the field. The site of the great Aten temple at Amarna is just behind us. He was still working full-time, absolutely hands-on, directing the excavations. It was pretty hot at the time, but he showed no signs of not being every bit as fit and healthy and robust as he always had been. And like I say, I think a lot of us thought he was going to go on forever. So it's a great shame that he's no longer with us, but he's left this fabulous body of work. And this lecture is in no way a tribute to him, really, in as much as it simply doesn't do that work justice, not in any way. But as I say, privileged to have known him, and I'm very grateful to him for everything he's done, as we all are. And his spirit lives on in Amarna and in that work. So I just wanted to acknowledge that before we start. So we are going to be in the 18th dynasty today. As I always say, we Egyptologists don't really like absolute dates, but for the purposes of just getting a sense of where we are in ancient history, we are in the 18th dynasty, towards the end of it, and you can probably see the names Amenhotep III and Amenhotep IV, brackets Akhenaten, cropping up towards the end of the list just here. So, as I say, we don't really like absolute dates, but if we think of Amenhotep III's reign as beginning in approximately 1390 and lasting for almost 40 years down to 1353, and then Amenhotep IV, brackets Akhenaten's reign, beginning in around 1353 and lasting for about 16 or 17 years down to 1336, we wouldn't be too far wrong about that. Amenhotep III was crowned as Neb-Ma'at Ra, the Lord of the Justice of Ra, perhaps the possessor of the Justice of Ra. And here he is in a fairly identifiable image of the king, with these very distinctive almond-shaped eyes and very pronounced eyebrows and very youthful looking features. And this is an example of the second style of the depiction of the king in art, which is from the later period of his reign. We'll look in more detail later on at what these various different styles mean. We are today going to be looking in particular at the later part of the king's reign, specifically the period from his year 30 onwards. And that point in the reign is significant because it's the time when the first of three Hebsed festivals were celebrated. The Hebsed festival was by this point a very long established festival, a ritual of part of the ritual of kingship, celebrated usually not before 30 years of the reign of the king had elapsed. And of course, many kings of Egypt didn't have reigns as long as that. So it was already quite an achievement to get to a Hebsed. And it's a time during which the king was required to kind of confirm or restate their suitability to rule. One of the parts of the ritual is that the king was required to physically to run apparently around a particular court. Hebsed court, a very well-known example, is a part of the step pyramid enclosure of Djoser at Saqqara. The idea of the king running the Hebsed is an important part of the Hebsed iconography. So the Hebsed Festival is a sort of opportunity to celebrate the king's lengthy reign, but also to, as I say, restate, confirm their suitability to rule. And these festivals then could take place at regular intervals beyond this point as well. And Amenhotep III celebrated three altogether in his year 30 and then around 34 and 37. This is an image on the left-hand side here from the tomb of PHARAOHS, the chief steward of Amenhotep III's great royal wife, Queen T. The tomb is to be found in the Asasif area. It's one of the ones you can visit, and it was published by the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago. Their volumes are all freely accessible online, so you can have a good look at these images for free if you would like to do that. Here, Amenhotep III is shown in Jubilee attire. So in the sort of traditional garb that the king would wear during these celebrations. The Hebsed scenes, we'll have a look at several of these during this talk, because they're a very important part of the later part of the reign, and the tomb of PHARAOHS is a very good source of visuals for them. Shortly after the third of these festivals, King Amenhotep III died in around year 38 or 39, and he was succeeded by Neferkheperu Ra Wa-en Ra, another Amenhotep, Amenhotep IV. And this is the king who would later rename himself Akhenaten, and we see him here on the left-hand side in the form of a colossal statue discovered at Karnak, now in the Luxor Museum. Akhenaten's great royal wife, of course, was Nefertiti, whose name means the beautiful one has come, and she's become very, very famous, particularly because of this absolutely incredible bust, which was discovered at their capital city, at Amarna, by the German mission operating in the early years of the 20th century. It's now in the Egyptophiles Museum in Berlin. It is strikingly realistic and even modern looking. By our standards, this is undoubtedly the face of a very beautiful person. Whether or not she really looked like this, of course, is subject to open to question. But But anyway, it's the image we know Nefertiti by best, and it's for this reason that she's become very famous, although she was also extremely prominent during Akhenaten's reign, and that is important too, of course. Perhaps the single most important feature, the defining feature of Akhenaten's reign, is the introduction of a new-ish, not entirely new, as we'll see, soul god, the Aten. And this is a relief also in Berlin in the Egyptophiles Museum, showing the Aten, but not in its typical Amarna style, but in an earlier style. Here, the god is shown as a human being with a falcon head and a sun disk above the head. And this is from Karnak. The early depictions, interestingly enough, of Akhenaten, despite the fact that the reign would shortly come to be defined and characterized by everything changing, things are relatively conventional in the early years, and depictions of the king and the god actually quite closely follow depictions of king and gods from the previous reign, from the time of Amenhotep III. And the so-called didactic name of the Aten, a particularly sort of long, convoluted writing of the god's name, which would become standard later on, doesn't appear at this point. Instead, you've just got the word Aten written out in hieroglyphs above and to the right of the sun disk there. But this new artistic style and a new convention in the way that the Aten was depicted would follow shortly. And this is essentially what it looked like. This is perhaps, we think, the earliest known, or the earliest surviving depiction of the Aten in this new style. As a sun disk, in fact, most of that disk is missing, but you can just about see the bottom of the curve of it in the image here. And then with these very distinctive sun's rays descending down from the disk and reaching downwards towards the figures on Earth, as it were, figures of the king in both instances here. And in fact, the name of the king here was given as Amenhotep originally, the name that he was first crowned with, but subsequently recut when Amenhotep IV changed his name to Akhenaten. And this, of course, is the form in which we would come to see the Aten, along with the king and other members of the royal family, Nefertiti, and sometimes royal daughters as well, much more commonly in the later period of the reign. So you see the sun disk at the top in the image on the left here, the sun disk, benevolent rays descending downwards towards the figure of the king, Nefertiti on the left-hand side, and the rays of the sun, as you can see, terminate in these little hands, which are not always, but sometimes holding little symbols, hieroglyphic signs, most commonly the Ankh sign, the sign for life, living, words like that in the Egyptian language. There's also a was here, which is another symbol meaning something like dominion. We translate it as something like that. So the idea is that the Aten is offering up qualities such as life to the people down on earth, principally the king and queen, whose own status is elevated as a result of this. So all the other gods by this point cease to appear in iconography, and their very existence seems to have been sort of done away with. And from this point on, the Egyptian population are going to be thinking of their gods as being the Aten, with sort of closely following Akhenaten and Nefertiti. And this is that very particular name of the Aten. It's the earlier form, the earlier of two forms of the name of the Aten, which came to be written in a pair of cartouches like this. And the idea of the name of a god being written in a cartouche is itself quite unusual. And the full name in the earlier form, as here, is in fact Ra-Horakhti, Ra being the name of the sun god, Horakhti being comprised of the word Hor, the name of the god we know better in its Greek form, Horus. And Akhti is written with two horizon symbols, and altogether the name of this god, Ra-Harakti, means Ra, who is Horus, in his horizon. A little bit as though this is a sort of composite god who's part sun god and part Horus. Horus is the god, by the way, who more than any other embodies the divine aspect of the king on earth. So it's a kind of union, if you like, of all these different things, the idea of the sun god, the god Horus, and the king. So the Aten is Ra-Harakti, rejoicing in the horizon, in his name, Shu, another god, part of the Heliopolitan creation myth, as we'll see, who is in the sun disk. So according to this name, the Aten is a sort of form of the sun disk, embodying all of these different things: the sun, perhaps Horus, the creator god Shu, all embodied in this sun disk appearing in the horizon. And aside from the typical scene that we have of Akhenaten, and usually Nefertiti, and sometimes their daughters, one or more of their daughters, being bathed in the beneficent rays of the Aten sun disk. That's the sort of classic scene that we see in 2 dimensions. In 3 dimensions, in statuary, we tend to think of Akhenaten as being represented by these very, very odd colossal statues with very, very exaggerated features. We'll see this a little bit better in the succeeding slides. I find it always very interesting to think that these images, which have come to represent Akhenaten more probably than any other images, certainly in 3 dimensions, any other statues, were only discovered for the first time in the 1920s, initially in 1925, by the French mission at Karnak, initially directed by Maurice Pillet and subsequently by Henri Chevrier. They discovered the fragments of what might have been as many as 30 or 40 statues like this. And here are some of them emerging from those excavations. I don't know this for certain, but I think this photograph is probably taken just outside the eastern enclosure wall of the Amen temple in the area of the largest of Akhenaten's buildings at Karnak, the Kemp Aten. Those colossal statues are fragmentary. In some parts, the fragments only being quite small, but in others, as you can see here, there's quite a lot of the statues that survived. And some of these are on display in various museums, I think entirely in Egypt. I'm not sure any are outside Egypt, but correct me if I got that wrong. Anyway, this is in the Egyptian Museum in the center of downtown Cairo. JE 49529, Journal d'Entrée 49529. This is the definitive Akhenaten Colossus, at least according to Lisa Maniquet, whose book The Akhenaten Colossi at Karnak is the definitive survey of the set. And this gives you a better idea, I think, of the way in which these statues have rather exaggerated features. They have a very sort of elongated face, very pronounced and sort of pursed lips, long nose, quite broad shoulders, in some cases pronounced breasts, an extremely narrow waist, broad hips, a kind of bulbous belly, and quite large buttocks. So very curvy, frankly, statues. But some people would see these as being so exaggerated in their features that they are almost grotesque. Whatever you think about them, grotesque is maybe a bit of a loaded term. Whatever you think about them, they certainly don't conform to the very rigid canon of Egyptian art that governed the way in which statues of the king and others were cut, both before and after this time. So they are very, very distinctive. And they were cut, interestingly enough, in a very early part of the reign. So rather than Akhenaten's reign getting sort of more and more exaggerated, or stranger and stranger, if you like, as it goes on, actually it seems to have been very, very strange right at the beginning. And if anything, it gets less strange as the reign goes on. But in those early years, in fact, there's a sort of culmination of change, and suddenly a dramatic break around year 4 to 5. We can't be absolutely sure when. This is the point at which it seems Amenhotep IV renamed himself Akhenaten. So the name Amenhotep, of course, is a name that evokes the god Amen, who up until this point had been the Egyptians' most important deity. Amenhotep means something like Amen is satisfied, and Amen is one of the gods that no longer exists, no longer have any relevance under the reign of the new king. So it was appropriate that he should change his name to an Aten worshipping name, Akhenaten, which means something like effective for the Aten, effective on behalf of the Aten, perhaps something like that. And at the same time, Amenhotep IV, now Akhenaten, founded a brand new capital city, which he also named after the Aten, Aten, the horizon of the Aten. And that city was constructed at the site we now archaeologists refer to as Tel El Amarna. That's actually a corruption of the name of two nearby villages at Til and Beni Amra, which in the 19th century archaeologists heard kind of run into one another as Tel El Amarna. And it's that site, of course, that gives its name to the period and the style. So Amarna period, Amarna style, etc., etc. Don't forget, of course, that the very name of the Aten evokes this idea of the god being specifically the sun disk in the horizon. So the idea of the new capital city being the horizon of the Aten also seems to have been sort of symbolic of this this new kind of universe, if you like, of Akhenatens. So let's have a look, first of all, at cities. What I want to do in this talk really is to give a very, very kind of brief overview of some of the key features of Akhenaten's reign, and then to look to see how, rather than his reign being a complete break with everything that had gone before, actually perhaps Akhenaten was taking inspiration from his father Amenhotep III. And I think we can perhaps see that to some extent in the way they approached city planning. So we know a great deal about Akhenaten's intentions for his new city from the series of texts that he left cut into the natural rock in a series of locations in a giant ring around the spot in Middle Egypt where he was going to build his new capital city. These are, as I say, cut into the rock in the shape of stelae. We refer to them as boundary stelae. This one in the image here is boundary stela A. They were given these letters in the, I think it's Norman de Garris Davis's system of not numbering, lettering, I think. In which case it's from the early 20th century. So this is A. It's actually on the west bank of the river. The city is on the east, but Akhenaten's sort of conception of this new place took him both sides of the river, as we'll see. It's very close to actually another archaeological site, Tun El Jebel, nearby village Tun El Jebel. Tun El Jebel is much better known for an animal necropolis and Roman period tombs. But a little way away from those, cut into the cliffs, is a very well preserved example of a boundary stela, as we see here. And this follows the typical format for these things. So cut into the rock, it sort of evokes the idea of a round-topped stela with a lunette, a kind of graphic portion at the top, and we can see the sun disk there with its beneficent rays descending downwards towards Akhenaten, who's just off to the right of the center, behind him Nefertiti, and shown much smaller a couple of their daughters. And then beneath this great scene, a long hieroglyphic text inscribed in rows, reaching right down to where the drift sand has started to consume this part of the site. And I think it's probably fair to say that these boundary stelae, or the texts thereon, are the best we have in terms of a statement of intent as far as city building, city design and planning goes on the part of a pharaoh. As I say, they were set up in a sort of giant ring around the place where Akhenaten was going to build this capital city. There are 15 of them altogether, 3 on the west bank. So A is the one at the sort of top left here, northwest. That's the area of Tuna al Jebel. You can see the River Nile perhaps snaking around towards the right-hand side here. So the green or yellowy green shaded area here is cultivated agricultural land. The River Nile shows up as this snaking kind of band, and the black shapes around the middle towards the right there are the archaeological remains of the city of Amarna. And then the dots, of course, are the locations of the boundary stela themselves. So you can see 3 on the west, 12 on the east. They roughly follow the great curve of the cliffs that arc around the site of the city to the east. And then there are a few clusters. There's one X at top right, which is sort of at the point at which the this great arc of the cliffs begins. The cliffs are right jammed up against the river here. Then sort of downwards and to the right, you have V and U. And then N is where the cliffs begin to take a sort of course back towards the river. J, K, and M right again on the river at the southern extent of the site, and then P, Q, H, R, and S are all clustered out in the high desert. And the proclamation includes things like this. I'm sorry, my picture-in-picture just obscures some of the text here slightly. It includes lines like this: I shall make Akhenaten for the Aten my father in this place. I shall not make it for him to the south of it, to the north of it, to the west of it, to the east of it. I shall not expand beyond the southern stela of Akhenaten towards the south, nor shall I expand beyond the northern stela of Akhenaten towards the north. And he goes on to describe the various kinds of buildings that would be in the city, what they would be for. He mentions that there will be a royal tomb, which will be for him and for his great royal wife Nefertiti and their eldest daughter, and so on and so on. As I say, it's about as detailed and clear a statement of intent as we have from ancient Egypt. And this is perhaps what the city would have looked like from the air in one of these tremendously useful visualizations by the French Egyptologist and artist Jean-Claude Golvin, the author of the Egypte Restituée series of books and a fabulous website where you can get images like this one for free. This is Amarna from above. So again, you can see the blue in this case of the River Nile snaking its way south to north as it flows, with the city itself on the east bank. Then the low desert in this sort of half moon shape, with the high desert cliffs arcing around to the east, the eastern side. You might be able to make out a couple of sort of entry points in the cliff leading off into desert wadis. The one of these that's more or less in the bottom right hand corner of the image leads off to the royal tomb, where Akhenaten built his tomb. Actually, there are several tombs in the area, 4 of them more or less sort of fully cut out there, which makes the whole thing look like a sort of a valley of the kings for this new capital city. And that wadi leading off to the east of the city, of course, means that if you're standing in the right place in the city at the right time, the sun can appear to rise on the horizon at exactly the point at which the royal tomb was to be found. It's difficult not to think that that wasn't a deliberate part of the choice of location and design of the whole city. And it was first recorded, the remains of the city first recorded by the Napoleonic expedition in the beginning of the very late 18th century, beginning of the 19th. And it's been visited by Egyptologists and archaeologists frequently ever since, for the last 40 or so years, by Barry Kemp and his team. And they have been able to do an awful lot of excavation work in the area to help us to establish the layout of the city, the position of the buildings, and function of some of these buildings as well. So we know a great deal about the temple buildings, the Great Aten Temple, the smaller Aten Temple. Great Aten Temple is referred to as the Long Temple by Barry and co. There was a royal road running through the city with the temples to the east, the Great Palace to the south with an extension which has come to be known as the Smenkhare Hall. On the other side of the road, there is a king's house, administrative building, the office of the letters of Pharaoh, which is where the famous Amarna letters, the diplomatic correspondence between Akhenaten and kings around the Middle East, were found, and various other workshops, buildings for the production of this, that, and the other as well. And this is just, by the way, this is just the central city area. There are a number of other suburbs to the north and south where there are further cult buildings and houses of all kinds. Also, we have a workman's village and a so-called stone village, which give us a little bit more information about the lower classes of the population, if you like. Altogether, Amarna is aside from being the location for the capital city at this great, fascinating point in history, it's the best preserved city of any kind that we have in Egypt, and therefore the best opportunity we have to see what a population of, we think, about 30 to 50,000 people look like. Fantastically interesting. One aspect of it is that clearly it was very deliberately planned. We can tell that from Akhenaten's boundary stele inscriptions and also from the archaeology. It's also clear from the fact that we know Akhenaten didn't reign for much longer than, say, 16, 17 years, and he didn't make the move to Amarna until year 4, 5. And it's clear from the archaeological remains that the city was up and running as a fully functioning city during the second half of the reign. Everything was built fantastically quickly, and regardless of what you think about what he was doing and the fact that the city was abandoned afterwards, it's a sensational achievement for anybody to have had the idea to build a city, a capital city, of a major Mediterranean power like this, and get it up and running in such a short space of time. But they do seem to have done it, clearly it was very extensively planned. They didn't just put the buildings up higgledy-piggledy. And in fact, not very long ago, an architect, Michael Mallington, working with Barry Kemp, looking at the precise location of the boundary stele and other buildings in the city and the way that they were aligned, noticed correspondences and plotted lines in between various strategic points. The royal tomb, emanating from the royal tomb, that's the point in the extreme east, extreme right of the slide here. If you draw lines from that point through various points in the city, the Great Aten Temple, the Small Aten Temple, they then extend outwards towards other strategic points, such as the boundary stele on the west side of the river. And the whole thing, at certain points, can be made to look like a sort of giant temple design. It's not clear to what extent this was absolutely deliberate, but it is quite compelling, all of these correspondences. In any case, it's very clear that there was a clear plan on a very, very grand scale here. And actually, much as this might seem unique in Egyptian history, we can see that Amenhotep IV might in fact have been inspired by his father, Amenhotep III, in this, because there is something similar that we can detect in the evidence for the last part of Amenhotep III's reign. So again, thinking about these Heb-Sed festivals, it's the first of the three of them during the reign of Amenhotep III that has the greatest impact. That's the one in year 30. And here again we see Amenhotep III in Jubilee attire, and another scene from that tomb, Theban tomb 192, the tomb of Keruef. One of the features of this point in the reign is that it seems to have inspired the construction of a new royal palace to the west of the river in the city of Thebes. And in fact, that palace sat at the center of a sort of small city, what you might describe as a city in its own right. And this is known to us now as Malkata, an Arab word which means something like you can pick things up. It gets this name because up until quite recently, the last century or so, it was possible to see on the surface in the desert in this part of the Luxor area, lots of little archaeological fragments, basically bits of wall plaster, pottery, etc., which are the remains of this great city. Its name was the House of Nebma-Art-Ra. Nebma-Art-Ra is the coronation name of Amenhotep III, the splendor of the Aten, interestingly enough. When we think of the Aten as being Akhenaten's great god, but here is the name of that god cropping up in the palace of his father, Amenhotep III. Established around year 29 or 30, in time for that, Heb said, with Amenhotep's palace at its heart, and this was designed as a sort of a temple almost, with a kind of sanctuary area where instead of finding an image of the god, you'd find the king seated on a throne. It's as I say, it lies out in the sort of southern end of the Theban cemeteries, at the edge of the desert, and where the desert meets the cultivation. And there's not a great deal of it to see now, but over the years, a number of missions, American, Japanese, and others, have had a good go at excavating the area, and they've been able to establish the ground plan of a large part of this city, including the Palace of the King, which survives in its sort of foundations and the lowest courses of the wall, to the extent that it could be quite a detailed plan could be developed. That area is protected, so it's in fact it's possible to visit. And actually, the most recent project working there, another American project, has built up some of those walls to protect the original mud brick and to give visitors a bit of an idea of what you can see. This has also been used to inspire the brilliant French Egyptologist and architect Frank Monnier, a good pal of mine, to create a 3D model of the palace. So this is his reconstruction of it, with this sort of central colonnaded area at the end, just as you would find a kind of colonnade in the center of a temple. Based on the architecture and decorative themes borrowed from Malkata, but also elsewhere, palaces at Amarna and some tomb decoration. He suggests that the interior of that hall might have looked a bit like this. And the throne room, with Amenhotep III himself seated on a throne inside this grand sort of shrine canopy thing, might have looked a little bit like this. And in fact, we have tomb scenes of the king sitting in exactly a kind of shrine like this in his palace. You can find these reconstructions online on Frank's website, incidentally, and I would urge you to do that. So Amenhotep III, it seems, was constructing things on a grand scale as well. In fact, even grander than you might think just from looking at the palaces. And in fact, the grandest part of his city at Malkata isn't really visible on the surface anymore. You can only see it if you can get a bit of elevation. So if you're in a balloon, as I was when I took this photograph, you might just about be able to make out 2 rows of roughly sort of square-shaped low mounds. These are actually pretty massive, as you can perhaps see from the houses that are around about at the cultivation edge here. So massive, in fact, that if you're walking around this area, as I can tell you from experience, you barely get a sense of these mounds at all. You just sort of perceive a slight sort of slope here and there, but they clearly are 2 rows of very, very large, albeit low, mounds. You can see them much better in satellite images. So at the desert edge here, you can just about see the shadow of those 2 rows of mounds, and then in the cultivated area around the fields, you might be able to make out a roughly rectangular shape with a kind of mouth opening pointing towards the bottom right of the slide here. This is in fact the remains of what we call the Birket Habu. What you're looking at here, and the green areas are of course farmers' fields, with the green crops growing in them. The lines of this great rectangle with the opening at bottom right are where people have built their houses. The reason those houses are built along this sort of line is that those areas where the houses are built are on slightly higher ground, and that's because the higher ground is caused by more of these mounds, now invisible underneath the buildings. But it means those mounds means that those areas were too high up, too far separated from the water table to be usable for farming. So the houses have been built on the mounds and the fields in between. As I say, this is the remains of the Birket Habu. Birket is the Arabic word for lake. Habu takes its name from the nearby Medinet Habu. So this is the Lake of Habu, and it was an enormous artificial harbour of the kind that we see here in this. It's another drawing of Jean-Claude Golvan's. It was an artificial construction of Amenhotep III with his palace and the city behind it. Archaeological work in the last few years has shown that actually it was connected to the river, even though the River Nile is a few kilometers away. And this canal connecting the harbour and the river supplied it with water. And in fact, it was filled with water for maybe as many as 16, 17 years, I think the archaeologists suggested. That's a team led by Angus Graham, by the way, formerly a project sponsored by the EES. And this is probably an enormous artificial harbour for rituals involving the king parading around the water on a boat, which may have some significance, as we shall see. Incidentally, fun fact, if you calculate the total volume of soil the Egyptians would have had to dig out of the ground in order to create this artificial lake, the total volume is greater than the volume of the Great Pyramid, which makes this the biggest construction project in ancient Egyptian history. So there we are. Fun fact, you can hardly see it, but this is a clear sign of Amenhotep III's massive building project. So very grand plan, and in fact on both sides of the river. So the pins here are in the spots where we find buildings or constructions of Amenhotep III. So the Birket Habu is probably just about visible to you in the bottom left. The other pins in that area all relate to archaeological remains of the city of Malkata. You might just about be able to make out a pin roughly in the center labeled Colossi of Memnon. Those are the statues that stood at the front of the king's mortuary temple. Up at the top of the slide, there's a pin in the map at the tomb of the king in the Valley of the Kings. And on the eastern side of the river, the other side of the river, which takes the form of this sort of dark line running from the top to the bottom of the slide, roughly on a sort of diagonal. The two pins to the right of that are the Luxor Temple and Karnak, where the king built very extensively. So lots of monuments, both sides of the river, but were they all connected as we think the buildings were at Akhenaten's capital city, Amarna? Well, the mortuary temple, which is the place where the cult of the deceased king was celebrated, appears, strangely enough, to have been activated at the time of the first Hebsed. And this is odd, of course, because the king was still alive at this point. So why activate, why bring a temple relating to his cult into use at this early point? Could it be so that the king's cult was celebrated while he was still alive? Well, that would be strange, wouldn't it? Unless the king wanted himself to be deified to a greater extent than other kings normally would. And we can construct a bit of an argument to suggest that this is in fact exactly what was going on. So this is another scene from the tomb of Keroef, Theban tomb 192. We see here Amenhotep III, again in the Hebsed Jubilee attire, but in what's described here as the night bark. This is a boat on which the king is going to be sailing through the night. And that's very evocative of the idea of the journey that the king makes through the night following death to be reborn into the new day and the eternal hereafter. And this is a part of the Hebsed scenes in the tomb of Keroef. So it does kind of look from this as though at the point of the Hebsed, rather than being rejuvenated, or rather than reconfirming his suitability to reign on earth. It's as though the king is being born into the next life as he would be in death. And in fact, this is by no means a consensus view, but it's been suggested by Ariel Kozlov, among other scholars of Amenhotep III and his era, that the Luxor temple on the other side of the river may also speak to some of the of what happens to the king at the time of his death. So the very unusual sun court that's at the center of the temple of Luxor, with 2 rows of colonnades on 3 sides, it's a very striking part of the temple. It's been suggested by Dr. Kozlov that these may evoke the idea on a giant scale from the air, as it were, and of a kind of car sign. And this is this sign on the left-hand side here with 2 upraised arms. And this sign is the symbol of the spirit of, or one aspect of the spirit of the deceased. So it's very much a kind of funerary symbol. And the Opet festival, which is at the sort of center of the purpose and function of the Luxor temple, is the idea of the rebirth of the royal car, the rebirth of the royal spirit. But there is also this connection with death. And we might also think of a particular part of the temple at the back here as well, where there is a hall which, rather than running in a kind of north-south direction, the temple of Luxor unusually is oriented north-south to connect it with the temple of Karnak, which is off to the north. This part of the temple at the back is oriented east-west, and it seems to point westwards specifically. Some of the scenes in this part of the temple evoke the idea of the journey of the king or the sun god through the night. Again, this is this journey that the king is going to be making in death, and it is aligned westwards in the direction of that mortuary temple. In which case, perhaps we can see a similar kind of correspondence between Amenhotep III's buildings on both sides of the river, just as we see at Amarna in the next reign. So perhaps there was a similar vision for Thebes under Amenhotep III as there was for Amarna under Amenhotep IV. We have not only alignments to draw on here, but also building inscriptions. We've already seen that Akhenaten left us these building inscriptions in the form of the boundary stela, but in fact this black granite stela of Amenhotep III also gives us a lot of detail about Amenhotep III's building activities, including passages like this one. He made as his monument before his father Ammon the building for him of an august temple on the west side of Thebes. That's the mortuary temple. And Amenhotep is content with the work for his father Ammon in southern Ipet of fine sandstone, wide, very great, and exceedingly beautiful. That's the Luxor temple. And he discusses various other buildings of his as well. So, interestingly, we have alignments and we also have building inscriptions. Perhaps Akhenaten wasn't breaking with tradition just quite to the extent that we think he was, but actually following quite closely his father. Can we see correspondences like this in the statuary of the 2 kings as well, despite Amenhotep IV, Akhenaten's being so very different apparently from what had gone before? So let's have a look at the statues of Amenhotep III. They fall into 3 categories representing 3 different styles, which appear to relate to 3 different periods during the reign. The first of them is very conventional, very typical of Egyptian art generally. So this is the first style, and this is what dominates the art in 3 dimensions of Amenhotep III in the period leading up to that first crucial Hebsed festival. They're characterized by, as it says here, great refinement. I'm sure I'm borrowing a colleague's art historical analysis here. Great refinement, austerity of detail, formal simplicity of costume. These 2 statues are at one end of the sculpture gallery in the British Museum. If you're familiar with that part of the world, you'll know these statues, slightly larger than life size, very imposing, very impressive. And to be honest, unless you really knew your Egyptian art, or you read the inscriptions or the label, these could almost be statues of any king from any period in Egyptian history. They're very conventional looking. Art historians will or not like me saying that because of all the subtle details in there in Egyptian art. But essentially, these look very conventional. You'll probably agree. Now, at the time of the first Hebsed, not only do we get a change of style, as we'll see, but there's also a sudden huge increase in the number of statues being produced, and we see this most obviously in the production of literally hundreds of statues of a lion-headed goddess, normally identified as Sekhmet. In the inscriptions, we see some of them here in the Mut enclosure at Karnak. This is just a few of the examples in the collections in the British Museum as well. It's not just statues like this, but statues of all kinds suddenly were being produced in enormous quantities at this point in time for the first Hebsed. This also coincides with a new style, and this is that new style exemplified by this statue, which we've already seen in my title slide. It's a statue of a statue, in fact. So this is Amenhotep III, shown here with a very distinctively powerful, muscular body, but somewhat confusingly, the features of a child, very pronounced features, very large eyes, very large lips, too large almost for the size of the face overall, as you would expect from the image of a child. So this is a very, very youthful looking, albeit very muscular king. He also has the accoutrements of a god, things like armlets, which normally signify the divine, and lots of solar imagery. And this statue has a name, and that name is Ra-Herakti, Ra, who is Horus in his horizon, a god we last came across in the name of the Aten, if you remember. So Ra-Herakti, mighty bull who appears in Ma'at, good god in true facts, the sovereign, ruler of the nine bows, dazzling sun disk of all lands, whose uraeus illuminates the two banks. And this, we think, is not just any old statue of Amenhotep III, but the very one that was the focus of the cult of Amenhotep III in the Luxor temple. And it is called Ra-Herakti, as we've seen, part of the name of the Aten, and part of this name is the dazzling sun disk. So the idea of the Aten is very much evoked here too. And those armlets are more visible in these photographs here, in between the elbow and the shoulder, and this great big collar as well. These all indicate divinity, as does the fact that this image of the king is standing on a kind of sled, as you might be able to see here. So it's kind of a statue of a statue, as if the king is already either dead or deified, one or the other. So it's not just an image of the king, it's the image of a king in a particular form. And that double crown may in fact also be symbolic of the idea of the king as the creator god Atum. That could be very significant too. So solar imagery wise, as I mentioned, aside from the name of the king, the kilt which the king wears has around the bottom a series of uraeus cobras topped with sun discs. In the center, a cartouche with the name of the king, Nebma'at Ra, also topped with a sun disc. So lots and lots of sun disc related imagery here. And indeed, the deification of the king is a very important feature of the later years of the reign of Amenhotep III. We've already seen hints that even in the last years of his life, from the time of that first Hebsed festival onwards, he was perhaps becoming a god, perhaps almost as a king would normally do in the moment of death. And this is that very distinctive open court that we saw in plan earlier at the Luxor temple. In plan, it perhaps looks like the sign of a car. Beyond this point, again, sorry, I've managed to hide some of the text behind my face here. Sorry about that. Behind this this court, you've got a sanctuary, including a birth room. Room is the word that's just a bit hidden there. The birth room is very significant. It's here that we see images of the supposed divine birth of the king Amenhotep III. And these scenes appear again to have been completed in time for this first Hebsed. So what we're looking at here on the left-hand side is Queen Mut-Emwia, the great royal wife of Thutmose IV, mother of Amenhotep III, along with the very god Amun himself. They're facing each other and upheld by the goddesses Selkis and Nate. And I don't need to go into too much detail here, but this meeting of these two, Amenhotep III's mother and the god Amun, is going to go a little further. They're going to get a bit cozy. And it's going to result in the birth of Amenhotep III himself. So according to this narrative, Amenhotep III's father was not Thutmose IV, not his earthly father Thutmose IV, but the very god Amun. And we then see Amun holding the child Amenhotep III in another scene from the same room here. And then finally, in another part of the temple, which the birth room kind of leads you to, we see Amenhotep III as an adult kneeling before Amun, who's seated on a throne wearing his twin plumed crown and receiving the crown of Egypt. And by this point, as you can see from the image on the right-hand side here, Amenhotep III is wearing the curly horns of a ram. And the animal that represents the god Amun more than any other is the ram, often symbolized by these curly ram's horns. So Amenhotep has taken on some of the iconography of the god Amun at this point. And again, this is all to emphasize his own divinity. And this statue that's now in the Luxor Museum is essentially the same scene in 3 dimensions. So the figure of the god is largely missing, but this is the king Amenhotep III kneeling before a seated figure of the god Amun, who is bestowing upon his head the crown, the blue crown in this case. Among the other statues created in huge numbers around this time are lots and lots and lots of statues of various different gods, but all of them with the features of Amenhotep III. So we have here an image of Osiris on the left-hand side, Tarsokar Osiris on the right-hand side, but again, to emphasize, with the features of Amenhotep III, a little bit as though Amenhotep III is embodying all of these various different gods by this point. So what about the Aten? It's all very well looking for correspondences between the reigns of Amenhotep III and Akhenaten. We've talked about how Amenhotep III embodies all these different gods, but aren't we going to be saying that in the time of Akhenaten, they're all done away with in favor of just the Aten? Well, and isn't the Aten new in the time of Amenhotep IV, Akhenaten? Well, perhaps not as new as you might think. Actually, the Aten had been increasingly prominent from the time of Akhenaten's grandfather, Amenhotep III's earthly father, Thutmose IV. And we can see this in the stela, in fact, which is in between the paws of the Sphinx at Giza. Sphinx is very famous. The stela there, perhaps a little bit less so, but you can see it in this image in between the paws. Here it is. Bears an inscription which gives the stela the name, the Dream Stela of Thutmose IV. And this is an important part of the legitimizing of Thutmose IV's reign. Perhaps there was some dispute over who should inherit the throne following the time of Amenhotep II. The text says, "Behold thou me, my son Thutmoses." This is in the voice of the Sphinx itself. "I am thy father, Hora-Makhet, Horus in the horizon, Khepri Ra Atum. I will give to thee my kingdom upon earth at the head of the living. Thou shalt wear the white crown and the red crown upon the throne of Geb, the hereditary prince. The land shall be thine in its length and in its breadth, that which the eye of the All-Lord shines upon." So according to this text, at least, it's the Sphinx who bestows upon Thutmose IV the crown of Egypt and therefore the right to rule. And the Sphinx is the embodiment of the god Hora-Makhet here. Another sort of combination, Horus and Ra, and in this case it goes sort of further, embodying Khepri, the scarab beetle, another sort of form of the sun god, Ra himself, and Atum, the creator god, whose crown that statue of Amenhotep III from the Luxor temple may possibly be wearing. So not an explicit mention of the Aten here, but it's clear that it's a solar god, a sun god, that is responsible by this point for bestowing the crown of Egypt upon the king. And this armlet of Thutmose IV features an image of the king smiting an enemy here with a sun disk on his head. And into the time of Amenhotep III, in terms of archaeological material that survives from his reign, one of distinctive types of evidence are these commemorative scarabs made of, in this case, glazed steatite. And these are decorated on the underside with short inscriptions commemorating apparently historical events. And this one of year 11 describes the construction of a lake, at a place called Jaruha. Sometimes thought that this lake might actually be the Birket Habu at Malkata, but actually we now think it's probably a different lake from a different part of the country. Anyway, it was dedicated to Amenhotep III's queen, T, and it was inaugurated apparently from the royal boat, which was given the name in Egyptian, the Chehen Iten, the dazzling Aten. So we have the clear idea here of the construction of a lake, and even if this one at Jaruha isn't Malkata, we can see from the name of this boat that there's the idea of the dazzling Aten, a boat perhaps with the sun disk in it, just as we see in the Amduat narrative, the book of what is in the netherworld, when at the point of death the king becomes the sun disk, makes a journey through the netherworld on a boat. That's exactly what is apparently being enacted here in this lake in Jaruha. Maybe that is what was being enacted on the giant lake of Birket Habu as well. And these ideas are captured in what is a new way of writing the name of Amenhotep III towards the end of the reign as well. And this is the so-called rebus writing of the name Nebma'at Ra, in which the name of the king, rather than appearing in a cartouche as you'd normally expect, is written as follows. So in this, the little human figure here represents the word Neb, lord or possessor, something like that. The feather that the figure holds is the feather of Ma'at, and then the sun disk on top of the figure is Ra. So Nebma'at Ra, and Nebma'at Ra is inside a sun disk, as you can see here, and the sun disk, of course, is the Aten, and the sun disk is inside a boat on top of the hieroglyphic sign for the sky, and beneath that the hieroglyphic symbol which we read as Chehen, dazzling. So the implication of all of this in some ways seems to be that Nebma'at Ra is the embodiment of the Aten on a boat sailing across the sky. And again, this evokes this idea of the sun god in a boat making a journey, just as happens in the narrative of the Amduat, the end of the king's life. So in fact, is this why we get the activation of the king's mortuary temple at this point at the end of the reign? Is it that somehow at the time of the first Hebsed festival, the king is becoming deified and ascending to the next life? Perhaps. In any case, it's pretty clear that Amenhotep III is becoming divine to a greater extent than previous pharaohs, embodies a variety of gods, as we've seen, but the sun god, solar-related gods, seem to be most important, and the Aten in particular appears to be more and more important. And in this way, Amenhotep III perhaps embodies the Aten. Now, there is a third artistic style. So you'll remember the first one is very typical, very sort of classical Egyptian art. The second one is embodied by that statue now in the Luxor Museum, very youthful, very muscular king and with divine features. There is a third style, which is, as the caption says, much more naturalistic, where we see the king more like a sort of heavier set, older man, as if at the end of his earthly life, an interesting counterpart to this sort of rejuvenated, deified style. This statue now in the Brooklyn Museum exemplifies this. This is much more the kind of image we might expect to see of a king into the fourth decade of his reign. And we also see it in this statue. There's one other just like it in the same part of the Egyptian Museum on Tahrir Square. Really wonderful statues of the king wearing a particular garment which relates to the celebration of the Hebsed festival. So this is very much from the last few years of the king's reign, very much a Hebsed related thing. And you can see here very clearly he's heavy set, quite pronounced breasts, quite a full belly, and buttocks as well. Here's a little detail showing those breasts that are very visible beneath this garment, which joins at the front, just beneath the divine beard, or what's left of that divine beard. And you can see in profile here again, quite a curvaceous looking Amenhotep III here. That there's two statues just like that in this place, both of them headless, but one or the other of them perhaps should be attached to this head, which also has quite a sort of fleshy features. It's quite a sort of heavy set, sort of elderly looking face, very reminiscent, I think, of some statues, some sculptures from the succeeding Amarna period, perhaps, as we'll see. So statuary of the time of Amenhotep IV, Akhenaten. As we've already seen, we tend to think of Akhenaten as being his image as being exemplified by these very early colossal statues discovered at Karnak. Exaggerated features, grotesque, you might think. They superficially all look as though they're the same. Actually, there are subtle variations from one to the next, particularly in the headgear. So this one is wearing a particular kind of wig called a khat, quite a bulbous wig, and that double crown, again, possibly relating to the creator god Atum. And these statues of Amenhotep III, the three styles, and then the statues of Akhenaten, perhaps ought to put us in mind of the possibility of a co-regency. Co-regency is a phenomenon of Egyptian history. It's an Egyptologist's name for what happens when the reigns of two kings overlap. So one king, probably in later life, possibly in old age, nominates a probably younger, probably member of the royal family to rule alongside him as a co-regent. So you've got sort of two kings' reigns alongside one another. And when we know this certainly happened at other periods in Egyptian history, you sometimes get what we call double dated inscriptions. So the Egyptians date events according to the year of the reign of the king during which they took place. So year such and such, year 10 for argument's sake, of the reign of Tuthmosis or whatever. And in a double dated inscription, you'd have year 10 of Tuthmosis, which is equal to year 1 of King Amenhotep. In the case of Akhenaten and Amenhotep and Akhenaten, it has often been said in the past that we should look to there being a co-regency. Before we go any further, I should say that at this point, the consensus view among specialists of the period is that there was not a co-regency, because we don't have double dates or any other clear clinching evidence like that. But the evolution of the artistic styles, particularly in statuary, has led to the suggestion that there might have been, because we see these three styles: the first sort of conventional style, the grotesque or exaggerated style, and then the final naturalistic style occurring in both reigns. And the Egyptologist, the very distinguished and brilliant Egyptologist W. Raymond Johnson, articulated this theory in the 1990s. So this is that first normal style, as we've seen, everything looking conventional. And this, in fact, this normal style, in fact, is what we see in the very, very earliest part of the reign of Akhenaten in images like this one, where the king is depicted not as being in any way sort of grotesque here. This is Akhenaten, and yet he looks kind of, for want of a better word, normal. There's then a grotesque style, and we see that in the reign of Amenhotep III, in particular in images like these, where the king has these very exaggerated features, facial features, very big eyes, very, very sort of big lips, almost childlike, And of course, we see it in the colossal statues of Akhenaten. There's then this more naturalistic style, which we see in images like this one of Amenhotep III. And in actual fact, this is where Amarna sculpture eventually goes. So on the left-hand side here, we see this face, which perhaps fits the previous statue of Amenhotep III, wearing that Hebsed Jubilee garment. To me, this is very reminiscent of some of the sculptures, the very realistic, very compelling, naturalistic-looking sculptures that we see, for example, from the workshop of the so-called sculptor Thutmose at Amarna, an example of which we see on the right-hand side here. Some of these too are some of my one of my favorites. And of course, when we think about naturalistic looking, not grotesque, not exaggerated sculpture from the Amarna period, it's difficult not to think of that fabulous bust of Nefertiti, and another sculpture from also from Amarna, sadly, which hasn't survived anywhere near as well. It's the one on the right-hand side here, which appears to have been of a much more natural, older looking Akhenaten, which might in fact be a companion piece to the Nefertiti one. This the one in the on the right hand side here of Akhenaten is now in Paris, in the Louvre. Such a shame that it's not better preserved. I can imagine it must have been a very, very compelling looking image of the king. So it's as though the three sort of styles follow one another in each reign. In the reign of Amenhotep III, you've got conventional, exaggerated, natural. And then the same thing seems to happen in the time of Akhenaten. You've got conventional, exaggerated, natural. So this is what leads to this idea that rather than following each other, the two reigns overlap. So the conventional phase in both reigns happens at the same time. The exaggerated phase happens at the same time. The natural phase at the same time. That might also help us to explain why occasionally we have images of Amenhotep III cropping up at Amarna, like this one. This appears to be an image of Amenhotep III at Queen T, discovered at Amarna, which of course wasn't inaugurated until year 4 or 5 of Akhenaten's time, apparently several years after Amenhotep III had died. Maybe not so if they ruled alongside one another. And Ray Johnson suggests that a co-regency might have even been required by Amenhotep's deification. This is a very interesting thought, I think. If we think back to the first Hebsed, this idea that Amenhotep III is becoming a god and may even, in some sense, have died, then if he's kind of ascended to the realm of the gods, then maybe a mortal king to rule on earth was required, and perhaps that's why Akhenaten had to be brought in alongside his father as a kind of co-regent. Maybe. Interesting idea. Let's think again about these colossi as well. So this is the one we've seen several times. This is catalogue number A1 according to Lisa Manique's Akhenaten Colossi Karnak book. Very interesting, very excellent book. Lisa Manique also passed away not long ago. Another sad blow for Egyptology. She was a lovely person, a very good Egyptologist, and much missed. So this is the one wearing the cart and the double crown. This one in the Luxor Museum, there's only the head that remains in this case, wears the same wig, the cart, or Nemes, and the double crown. This one in the Luxor Museum wears a Nemes and either a double crown or possibly plumes. Difficult to say. So different headgear. We also, in fact, need to question the identity of these colossi. It's generally thought that they represent the king, but do they? There are alternative possibilities. The pose, with the arms crossed across the chest here, is what we would normally refer to as the Osirid pose, and this is the pose that the bodies of kings are placed in mummified form when they are finally interred in their tombs. It's the form that we see images of Osiris / the king take in memorial or mortuary temples. So the image on the far right hand side here is an Osirid statue of Ramesses III from Medinet Habu. So actually, are these Akhenaten, or are they in fact Osiris with the features of Akhenaten, maybe. This example of these statues is particularly puzzling or intriguing. This is Journal d'Entrée 55938, Manikay Catalogue H26. Seems to wear the double crown only, no wig or other headgear. And it's sometimes referred to as the sexless colossus. And they all have exaggerated features, breasts, buttocks, very narrow waist, etc., a little bit feminine perhaps, even when we're thinking of them as Akhenaten. This one, though, really looks more feminine almost than any of the others. And it's been suggested that this could possibly, in fact, be Nefertiti. So is it possible that some of these colossal statues actually are the queen, not the king? Could be. There is, in fact, another possibility. Firstly, some of these statues might actually represent Amenhotep III. And again, Ariel Kozlov has suggested that originally all of these colossi were images of Amenhotep III recut at the time of Akhenaten. But there is another very intriguing possibility, which is raised by another of the statues now in the Egyptian Museum. It's this one, Manikay Catalogue D9, which appears to be wearing the Nemes headdress, or clearly is wearing the Nemes headdress, and then plumes, possibly of the god Shu. And we've already come across Shu. He is a creator god whose name forms a part of the very full didactic name of the Aten, the earlier form of the didactic name of the Aten. So it would be very intriguing if these plumes evoke the idea of Shu, who was clearly in Akhenaten's mind when he was formulating his new religion. And indeed, Shu is a very important part of this new religion. This is an image of Nefertiti, now in the Brooklyn Museum. It was discovered by Flinders Petrie in 1892. This is Nefertiti offering an image of the god Shu up. Shu wearing 4 plumes here. So plumes are a part of the iconography of Shu. And Shu was a creator god, as we've seen. We've also talked a little bit about how some of the iconography of both the time of Amenhotep III and Akhenaten evokes the idea of Atum, sort of kind of creator god ideas floating around here. And indeed, one of the central premises of Akhenaten's new religion, the new religion of the Aten, is that the Aten is a creator god. It's for that reason that we see the sun's rays holding little symbols of the Ankh and offering them up to Akhenaten. The idea of that, it's a very visual way of demonstrating the fact that all life springs forth from the Aten. So in that sense, the Aten is the one and only creator god. That's the very essence of the role of this god in the new world. And this idea is captured in the single most important religious text of the period, the so-called hymn to the Aten, which is inscribed in various places around the city of Amarna. It includes lines like this one: "O sole god," the Aten that is, "like whom there is no other, thou didst create the world according to thy desire." Absolutely capturing this essence of the Aten's role as a creator god. So if he works in a museum. So what about Shu and Atum and all the rest? Well, they are a part of the so-called Heliopolitan creation myth. And if you know your Egyptian mythology, you'll probably know that there are various different ways in which the Egyptians told of the creation of the world and of mankind. But the myth that attaches to Heliopolis, which is the cult center of the sun god Ra, involves creation having sprung forth initially from Atum. Atum is the only being in the beginning of everything. And it's from Atum that 2 gods spring forth: Shu, who was the embodiment of air, and Tefnut, the embodiment of moisture. So this is how Shu fits into that particular myth. So thinking back again, sorry, this is all very complicated. Amenhotep III becomes the sun, becomes the Aten perhaps becomes this creator god at the time of his first Hebsed. The Aten, in fact, it seems, according to some of the evidence we have for the later part of the reign, was Amenhotep III. He actually was the embodiment of the Aten. This perhaps ought to cause us to reflect again on some of the evidence from Akhenaten's reign. So the boundary stele, in the boundary stele, Akhenaten says, as we've seen, I shall make Akhenaten for the Aten my father in this place. And of course, the Egyptians often referred to one or other gods as their father, but perhaps this is meant more literally in this case. If this idea that Amenhotep III was the Aten is carried over into Akhenaten's reign, then when he says, I'm making Akhenaten for my father, he's actually referring to his father, Amenhotep III, sorry. And again, this idea is present in another of Akhenaten's epithets, which appears in various places, including on the column of inscriptions on the front of this coffin from KV 55, cartouche on the front of which is missing, but there's no question that this epithet belonged to Akhenaten. And it is Parsheri Nefer en Aten, the beautiful child of the Aten. So again, Akhenaten is the child of the Aten, child of Amenhotep III. Amenhotep III equals the Aten. All seems to make sense, doesn't it? If so, then perhaps we need to see what's going on in the minds of Amenhotep III and Akhenaten in this way as being a sort of new version of the Heliopolitan creation myth, in which the Aten is the embodiment of Atum, and Amenhotep III is therefore the embodiment of Atum. And Akhenaten, in fact, is Shu, which might be why the Akhenaten colossi, some of them at least, appear to be wearing the plumes of the god Shu. And perhaps the reason for Nefertiti's prominence in all of this, and don't forget, when we see images of the Aten with its beneficent rays descending downwards, it's usually towards Akhenaten and also Nefertiti. Perhaps she's also required in this new theology as a representation of Tefnut, maybe the other of these two gods who are birthed by Atum. And this idea that Amenhotep III is a god to be worshipped by everybody, including Amenhotep IV, is again apparent in the tomb of Keroef. In this scene, we see Amenhotep III facing Amenhotep IV, who is making offerings to his father as if he was a god. So that would seem to sort of strengthen this idea of Amenhotep III's divinity. And all of this might also help to explain some of the strange features of the Aten that we see in the early part of Akhenaten's reign. The Aten seems to be treated in some ways like a king. So we've already seen that the name of the Aten is written in a cartouche, and ordinarily those name rings are reserved for the names of kings. So strange that a god would need to take on a cartouche. Perhaps not, if in fact this god was the king, Amenhotep III. And in fact, the Hebsed festivals, which were celebrated early on in the reign of Akhenaten, we haven't mentioned this yet, but in those first few years at Karnak, there were several Hebsed festivals, a bit earlier than the normal 30 years. But it's sometimes thought that these are Hebsed festivals being celebrated, not in this case by the king, but by the god. So why would that be? Well, again, if in fact the god is the king, Amenhotep III, that might provide the explanation. Whether or not you believe in a co-regency, and again, as I said at the beginning of this little section, the consensus view among Egyptologists is that there wasn't a co-regency. There may be a related but alternative explanation for the exaggerated features of the Colossus. According to this Heliopolitan creation myth, in which Atum is the sort of first being, gives rise to Shu, air, and Tefnut, moisture. There is this moment at which Atum gives birth to Shu, or separates from Shu. So two beings arise out of one. Now, at that moment, Atum becomes conscious. Heaven separates from the earth, and Shu, light and air, separated from moisture. But in order to create in this way, the original god, Atum, has to be sort of both male and female, has to have both those characteristics. So could this be the reason, the explanation for these strange exaggerated features that we see most obviously in the colossal statues? Is the so-called sexless colossus Nefertiti, or is it in fact a mixture of male and female, representing Atum or Shu? In any case, this idea of the moment of creation coming out of one being who is both male and female. That, in any case, that style in which you have exaggerated features, breasts, exaggerated belly, very narrow waist, exaggerated hips, buttocks, is characteristic of the Amarna period, and we see it here. If we look side on at the statues that stand either side of the boundary stela, this is boundary stela A at Tuna al Jebel again, but it is also present in the later years of Amenhotep III. So compare the profile of these two Amarna statues with the profile of this figure now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This is Amenhotep III, again wearing a kind of Hebsed garment from the later years of his reign. And again, it's the same sort of appearance that these fantastic statues in the Egyptian Museum have: pronounced breasts, a pronounced belly, and buttocks. And in fact, it has been suggested that this isn't purely explained by the fact that this is a representation of Amenhotep III in old age, but it's an attempt to capture the idea of a being having both male and female characteristics. So Amenhotep III here is not just sort of heavier set and older, but in fact fecund, full of kind of latent life and life-giving powers, possibly even pregnant, and also at the same time ethephalic. So if you look at this statue in profile, not only do you see those pronounced buttocks and a possibly pregnant belly, but the placement of the two hands around the front like this in profile almost creates the image of a kind of ethephalic being with erect penis, which also, again, of course, would speak to the idea of sort of fertility and life-giving power. So there we go. All a bit complicated. I've spoken for longer than I'm meant to, but then those of you who know my talks will probably know that that's how it always goes. Anyway, thanks very much for coming again. Thanks for sticking with it, and I hope you enjoyed it. Complicated ideas, but lots to think about, I hope. And I can see already that we have lots of comments and lots of kind contributions, or lots of new members as well. So hello to all of you who have joined. Hello, all of you who are Alabaster members. Sarah and David and Shlomo and Emily. Hello, all of you, and thanks, Annette. Thanks to all of you who have made contributions via the thanks button as well. I do really appreciate it. Hello, Mary. Hello, Tanya. Welcome to Alabaster membership. Great to have you on board. Yeah, so thanks for listening. And before I go to the questions, just a reminder that this is a free lecture. I do put, as I said before, despite my unreliable timekeeping, scruffy slides, chaotic presentation, I do put quite a lot of time and effort into putting these presentations together. And giving lectures like this is a part of how I earn a living. Previously, I would have been giving a lecture like this via Zoom and asking you to pay a registration fee. There's no fee to pay for today. It's free. But if you've enjoyed this talk, I'd really appreciate you. Any contribution you might like to make via the thanks button. I can't see it in my setup here, but I think the thanks button is just sort of somewhere there. So if you click that button, it won't empty your bank account automatically or anything. It'll give you a few options. So if you'd like to buy me a coffee or something like that, that would be really great. I'd be really grateful. I can see that quite a lot of you have already done that, so thank you so much. More talks coming up. Pyramids next month. How to read hieroglyphs the month after that. The crucial thing to remember is that pyramids is going to be another free talk like this. So I'm afraid I will be encouraging you all again to make your contributions via the thanks. But from September onwards, from How to Read Hieroglyphs onwards, those talks will be available to Lapis and Gold members only. Those categories aren't available yet. I don't want people to feel as though they have to sign up to those categories before they're actually lectures ready. But from September, from the beginning of September, those categories will be ready. And at that point, members in those categories will be the only ones who will be able to see these talks. And at that point, the back catalogue, or at least some talks in the back catalogue, will become for those members only as well. So so yeah, there you go. And I will I think there's a link underneath this in the blurb here about all of that. Takes you to a page on my website where I attempt to explain exactly what I'm doing with these lectures in the future. Thanks again, and I'm going to be here for another sort of 20 minutes or half an hour. So if you've got questions, do pop them into the text, and I will see if I can go back through the chat and see if there are any questions already there. Please bear with me while I just navigate this. So again, hello everyone. Apologies if I've already said hello, but hello, Sarah, Wendy, Judith, Chris. Egyptologia Brasileira. Hi from Brazil. I'm sure it's not the first time we've met. Hello in Brazil. I've just with another hat on. I work for a charity called the Robert Anderson Trust, and we have just had with us in London an Egyptologist from Brazil, Marina Buffa Cesar. She was great, and we may see more of her in the future. I hope that would be good. Radbood. Says the boat of T was called Aten. Was it T who influenced Akhenaten? Yeah, Radboud, you're right. We talked about this, didn't we? The dazzling Aten boat, which inaugurated Queen T's lake. I suppose we could be, couldn't it? Could it be T who was driving all of this religious doctrinal change? We can't know that for sure. Everything, of course, takes place in the name of the king. But who knows behind the scenes who was pulling the strings? Maybe it was T. Hello, Bettina. Hi, Kashava. Hi, Tony. Hello from DC. Love your work. Thanks for joining. Thanks especially, folks, to those of you if you're in a funny old time zone and you're here for the live event. I really appreciate your dedication. This going back to the good old days of lockdown, I tried to time the lectures in such a way that they were sort of suitable, tolerable for as many people as possible. But of course, you can't, with people joining from all over the place, all over the world. It's difficult to pick exactly the right time, and I know it's probably more convenient for some of you than for others. So if you're joining at a not convenient time, thank you so much. And just a reminder, actually, by the way, that the talk will be available in recorded form, I think, pretty much as soon as I sign off. So if you miss it, or you want to rewatch, or you want to share it with anybody else you think might be interested, then do please do that. Oh, John says audio is good. That's really great. Yeah, and I haven't noticed any comments saying audio not good. So if I've survived this far without any problems, then fab. And all I can say is I haven't, on that front, done anything different from last time. So I do not know what the problem was last time. Internet connection, maybe. Hello, Paula in Ireland. Hi, Jenny. Hello, Phil. Hi, Phil. Phil Richards, old pal from Egypt. Hi, Phil. Seattle Rain says hi from Seattle. Thanks for the live chats. I learned so much. Great to hear. Hello from Oxford. Emily says, yay, hieroglyphs. Hi from DC. Somebody else in DC. Yay. Hello to the fox outside my window, just wandering around in the garden. don't think he's interested in Egyptology, but anyway, hi. Hello, Linda. Yay, hi, Linda. Hello, Audrey again. We said hi earlier, didn't we, Audrey? Good, so great to meet you just recently. Hi, Jamie. All people I know from in real life. Hi, Mozart fan in Connecticut. Hi, Keith. Thank you so much for these discussions. Not Keith, sorry, Kelly. I'm so sorry, Kelly. Hi, Matthew in Cirencester. Hello again. Hi, Yvonne. Hi, John. Greetings from Paris. I was in Paris last week, John, doing some filming for a 3-part series on Ramesses II. Don't ask me when it's going to be out. I never know. But yeah, I was there. It was just me on my own with the crew when I was there. But who else is going to be in it? Salima Ikram, Jackie Williamson, Peter Brand, maybe some others as well. Anyway, so it should be good, hopefully. Hello from Atlanta, Georgia. Hi, Dom. Hi from Michigan. Wow, there's loads of people in the States. Hi from everybody in the States. Hi from India. Wow. Yvonne says, dear Dr. Chris, is it worth visiting the Ramesses exhibition in Cologne? Yvonne, I have not been and I couldn't tell you. I should think it will be great. I don't know that. I should think it would be great. And it makes me think I would like to go. But I'm sorry, I can't tell you, not from first-hand experience anyway. Mitch says, I have a tattoo of the Aten on my arm. Wow. Wow, that's dedication for you. Again, I can see here people making contributions. Thanks so much, everybody who's done that. I really appreciate it. Kashava in India says time to sleep. Fair enough. I don't know what time it is for you, but late. Thank you for being here at all. Bettina says, do we have any idea why Amenhotep III promoted the Aten? It seems to come rather suddenly. Yeah, good question. No, we don't. No, we don't. No, and no. Wouldn't it be great to be able to get inside the heads of the people who were deciding? And we don't even really know, as we've already said in the discussion, who was deciding. We always tend to talk about these things as having been undertaken in the name of the king, but it's absolutely clear that there must have been other people involved. And in fact, in the case of Amenhotep III and a lot of the planning and activity that went on around the Hebsed festival, it seems that Amenhotep, son of Hapu, who was Amenhotep III's great builder, great sort of architect, it became very unusually in Egyptian history a non-royal individual who became deified himself, and was allowed the privilege of having a mortuary temple of his own, alongside those of the kings on the West Bank in Luxor. He was clearly very influential, and was presumably very learned, and some of the ways in which the statuary, for example, some of the statuary of that period is inspired by Middle Kingdom statuary, which suggests that somebody had a great sort of knowledge of that kind of thing. There's some connoisseurship going on. Maybe that was Amenhotep, son of Hapu, but it's really very difficult, isn't it, to know exactly who was influential. Good question, thank you. Some good references to literature here. By the way, folks, I haven't done this yet, but some of you who have come to my talks in the past will know that I like, if I can, to prepare a kind of a page of notes and further reading. And in the talk, I referred to lots of stuff online that you can go and look up for free. And in some cases, I pasted the links into my slides here, but I like to gather them all together in a web page that you can read at your leisure. I haven't done that yet. As and when I get a moment to do that, I'll post the details to social media and I'll add it to the info beneath the talk here. So if that's of interest, keep your eyes peeled. There is obviously a massive amount of great literature available on this. Some of the things I've drawn on very heavily for this talk, particularly the work of people like Ray Johnson, Nicholas Reeves, Betsy Bryan, Ariel Kozlov, and others. Okay, let's keep going. Great to see so much discussion here. I don't feel as though I'm being very helpful with it, but great to see so much of it. I'm just starting to watch. I rewound to the start of the stream. I wish you the best of luck, but your team the worst. Guess where I'm from? So I'm guessing that BBS C666 is from the Netherlands. Yep, there's a big football match going on. Non-football fans may not be interested to know it's England versus the Netherlands in the Euros semi-final this evening. England have the opportunity to fail miserably again, as they usually do once every couple of years. Let's see. So that's my hard cut-off this evening. It's 20 minutes from now they'll kick off. Kevin says, hi Chris, spoke to you in Glasgow, thanks for the talk and haste you back. Hi Kevin, yeah, good to see you there. And I have been talking to Kate about coming back to Glasgow. It won't be for a year or two, but yeah, really enjoyed my time up there. Mental note, must stay longer next time because I had to run off. As those of you who were at that talk will know, yeah, I would have liked to have spent more time in Glasgow. So I forget when it is. It might even be as far ahead as 2026. But anyway, I've definitely said I'll come back earliest possible opportunity. Some Egyptologists think Akhenaten should be pronounced as Akachati, says Angel Great. I have not come across that before. Depending on the way, if I'm reading this right, Chati is the word for vizier in Egyptian, and the hieroglyphic sign for vizier is very different from any of the signs that are in Akhenaten's name. I don't know why anyone would think that. Anyway, interesting thought. A couple of people mentioning the connection between the hymn to the Aten and Psalm, which one is it, 23 in the Bible? Is it 23? Yes, and the debate around whether or not Akhenaten's worship of his sole god influenced monotheism, Christianity, and such. The work of Jan Assmann is the stuff to go to there. Jan Assmann is another very distinguished Egyptologist who died not long ago. He came to a talk of mine in Rhodes in 2008, the International Congress, and I was pretty I felt very honoured by that, but also pretty terrified. I wanted to go to him and say, "Please don't stay. You won't be impressed." I was talking about my PhD. Anyway. Yeah, somebody else who a colossal intellect. Angel Great says, "Hey Chris, do you watch Doctor Who?" Yes, I do. I'm a fan of the classic series, but not the modern one. Including Pyramids of Mars, the Egyptology themed story from about 1976. Tom Baker, Egyptology Doctor Who crossover. John Doe says, doesn't the art style used in the Amarna period survive till the day of Tutankhamun? I think this indicates the co-regency didn't happen between Akhenaten and Amenhotep III. There are some yes and no, I think, is the answer to that. Tutankhamun, yes, there are some items in the tomb of Tutankhamun which are absolutely Amarna. Very famously, the throne, the golden throne of Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun, which is absolutely Amarna style. There's an awful lot in the reign of Tutankhamun that's much more conventional, though. The throne probably is an heirloom that survives from the earlier part of Tutankhamun's reign. anyway, part of the story of his reign is that it saw the transition from the period of change under Akhenaten back to the old ways. But I don't think there's much correspondence between the later artistic styles of Amenhotep III and Tutankhamun. Could get lost in all of this. But thanks, interesting point. Anna Lizette says Amenhotep is pleased. Akhenaten is successful for Aten. Akhenaten indicates one who is active for the god rather than simply pleasing a god, in my opinion. Interesting. I mean, I suppose you could think of the word Amenhotep, the name Amenhotep, meaning Amen is satisfied. The implication being by the king. Who knows? Michael says, in Meri Ra's tomb, we can find the name Pa'artenam-heb. Some Egyptologists have suggested this is the same person as Horemheb. What is your opinion on this debate? Yes, that's not impossible, is it? We know that there were people during this period whose names were changed. So there's a high-ranking official whose tomb was discovered at Saqqara in the early noughties, who we know best by the name Meri Nate, who was also briefly Meri Aten, I think. So it's not impossible that an individual like Horemheb, whose name evokes a non-Amarna period god, Hor in this case Horus, might have had his name adapted to become an Artenist name. Pa'artenam-heb. Could be. Could be. I'm not sure that we can say that with certainty. Angel Great says, unrelated, but do you think the Damnatio Memoriae of Akhenaten by Horemheb was as revenge for the Dahamanzu incident or not? Well, so the Damnatio Memoriae thing depends on whether or not you identify one of those two Valley of the King's mummies as being Akhenaten, I think, right? And that identification is not secure, I think. And in any case, even if it was, I don't think we could. I always feel it's difficult to know for sure, whether in injuries, evident on mummies, which are apparently post-mortem, were Damnatio Memoriae or something else. And I don't think you could ever be sure about what the motivations were. But that's a very interesting thought as well. Jamie says, great job, Chris. Thank you, Jamie. Thanks so much. Love your use of the special hieroglyphic emojis. Hooray. Bahar says, love from Istanbul. Wow, hi, Bahar. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for joining all the way from Istanbul. One of my favorite places, Istanbul. A great archaeological museum with some great Egyptian things in. Christopher says, hey, from Cape Town. Wow, somebody else coming from a long way away. Scott says, with respect to his contribution to Artenism, any thoughts, theories as to how Amenhotep III escaped Damnatio Memoriae when almost every other Amarna pharaoh? Yeah, so yes, really good question, Scott. If Amenhotep III really was involved in all of this, then how did he escape being deliberately forgotten later on? Well, actually, I think that's probably the single best argument against there being too close a connection between Amenhotep III and what happens in Akhenaten's reign. Difficult to know for sure, isn't it? But you're right. Amenhotep the fourth Akhenaten, the mysterious Ankeperu-Re, who's probably Nefertiti ruling as pharaoh, Smenkhare and Tutankhamun, and also I, are all deliberately forgotten, at least as far as the Abydos king lists go. That's the same Abydos king lists I'm going to be talking about in 2 lectures' time. They're all deliberately forgotten by that point, and of course their names erased here and there, and yet Amenhotep III is not. So even I think it's possible. I think it's possible to see the influence of Amenhotep III and the things that are happening in the later years of his reign as influencing Akhenaten, while at the same time acknowledging that, you know, Amenhotep III didn't go too far in the eyes of his successors, whereas Akhenaten and co really did. But yeah, that is a very interesting point. I maybe should have mentioned that. Thanks. Emily says, highlight of my day. Thank you. Oh, that's very sweet, Emily. Thank you so much. Thank you for becoming a member. Bettina says, thank you, Chris. Would you care to let us know which theory you favour? I think I like all these ideas. I'm also a great one for sitting on the fence, if I'm really honest. Meaning, you know, I like to share evidence and ideas, and I don't, but I'm not so good at having, you know, clear opinions. I'm not a betting man. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. I like the idea that things are possible, and I think it's also important that we always bear in mind the extreme limitations of our evidence, which very rarely allows us to draw definitive conclusions. That's going to be a theme in my next talk, actually, on pyramids. You know, part of the reason why we get so many crazy theories around the pyramids is that the evidence just doesn't allow us to be absolutely conclusive in saying one way or another this is what happened or that's what happened. And while we can't be absolutely conclusive, that for other people is an invitation to come up with lots of crazy ideas. But you know, what I'm going to try and demonstrate in the case of the pyramids is that based on the evidence we do have, the consensus view is still the best and the strongest interpretation, but it's clearly not good enough for lots of people. Anyway, so I think I almost feel like maybe that's my professional duty, is to sort of say, here's the evidence. It might be this, it might be that. You make up your minds. As long as you always come back to the evidence if you're looking for interpretation. I've lost my place. Oh no, I've lost my place. Everything's just jumped. Yes, okay. Jehuti asked an interesting question. The dates you posted at the beginning would put the end of Akhenaten's reign as being about a year after a total solar eclipse. Any chance these two events might have been linked? I'm probably not the best person to ask about this, actually, Jehuti. I doubt they're linked, but certainly eclipses have been used as a means of trying to pin down relative dates that we have. So that's, you know, year this in the reign of Akhenaten or year this in the reign of Ramesses or whatever, to absolute dates, that's years BC, because occasionally there are references in Egyptian texts. You probably know all of this very well. There are references in Egyptian texts to events which might be descriptions of eclipses, and if so, because we can identify precisely when eclipses would have taken place, it's possible for us to say, might be possible to precisely date those inscriptions. But I doubt there's a connection in between the end of a reign of a king and an eclipse. But interesting point. Thanks. Gertie says, can't find the thanks button. Oh, drat. one of the problems with this is that I can't see what you can see, and my thanks button, if I press thanks when I'm logged into YouTube on somebody else's channel, it'll give me the option to give them a certain number of British pounds, and if you're logged in elsewhere in the world, your option will be in dollars or euros or whatever, and possibly, I don't know this, but possibly the thanks button isn't available everywhere. I just don't know that, or maybe to do with your type of login. I don't know. Thank you for trying. If you've tried to find the thanks button and can't find it, I'm learning all the time. Linda says, great talk, very interesting. Thank you so much, Linda. Thanks for coming. Thanks for all your support as always. Thank you for joining. Yeah, thank you all again. Sorry if I've mentioned everybody before, but thank you, Richard. Thank you, Marlene, Abdul. Thank you, Thori. Thank you, Phil, Rachel. Rachel says, hi, Chris. Hope you're well. Trying to get tickets for the SSAE Chesterfield Day School, but can't get a link. Please, do you have a link for those tickets? The short answer is no, and I think I owe you an email from elsewhere, don't I? And I'm really sorry, Rachel, and anybody else who doesn't get a quick reply from me. Sometimes I just can't keep on top of all my various different inboxes. So I am doing a study day on the 20th of July, which is a week on Saturday in Chesterfield, in the Midlands, and I don't know where you can get tickets except to say SSAE Chesterfield. What I will do, Rachel, is I'll try and find out from the organisers tomorrow, and I will try and post the details if I can get a link, and I'll also try and find your message and reply to you directly. I'm sorry I haven't done that yet. Just just struggling to keep on top of all my inboxes. But thank you for asking, and I hope to see you there. Maybe somebody else from Chesterfield is reading this and will be able to reply. That would be really great. I don't know. Stephanie says, my niece loved your book about King Tut. That's lovely to know. Thank you, Stephanie. Shlomo says, who are the other three tombs mentioned in the Wadi and Amarna, those near the royal tomb? Was one of those of Ai? If you, Shlomo, if you have a look, and forgive me if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, if you have a look on my channel under shorts, you'll see that there are a few videos about those tombs. So there's the main tomb, which is TA 26, 28, 29, and 30, I think, are the others that I visited. And they're all unfinished, all uninscribed. So we can't know for sure who they were being built for, but basically one of them has the dimensions of a king's tomb. So probably another pharaoh. That can really only be Smenkhare or Ankeperure Neferneferu Aten, if you believe those are different people. The others are smaller. One of them looks like a queen's tomb. So that could be for Merit Aten, who became great royal wife of Smenkhare, or it could be for Nefertiti if it was decided after a short while that there should be a change of plan and Nefertiti should not be buried in TA 26 with Akhenaten, but somewhere on her own. The other tomb has the same sort of dimensions as rooms Alpha, Beta, and Gamma in the royal tomb, which we think were used for the burial of royal princesses. So that's a very long answer, but no, probably not a tomb for Ai. He probably didn't. In fact, I think it is absolutely certain that he didn't become king until the end of the life of Tutankhamun, by which time the royal cemeteries moved back to the Valley of the Kings. So no. But anyway, for more on that, do have a look at those shorts wherever they are. Thanks, good question. Yeah, Anna says, question that cannot be answered is whether the major changes were more religious or political. Was it about power or spirituality? Yeah, that is the big question. And I'm sorry I didn't have more time to go into that today. And actually, folks, I think I'm probably not going to be able to take any more questions because of the pressing need to get to a television and watch England lose a football match. So I think I better just wrap up by again saying a few hellos. Hello, John. Hello, Stephanie in Nashville. Hi, Abdul in Las Vegas. Hi, Noha, an Egyptian in London. Hi, Noha, you're not too far away. Hi, Thori in Germany. Permian Extinction says, when you're doing another Egypt tour, hopefully under the Step Pyramid, I hope so too at some point, hoping to catch Dick Selleck's on it with you. Yeah, hello from Chicago. Yep. Stephanie says, what's the best book to learn hieroglyphs? Bill Manley's How to Read Hieroglyphs, off the top of my head. I may well use that to do a bit of teaching online at some point. Let me know if you think that'd be a great idea. Cal asks, what do you think is this story with Smenkhare? My talk on after Akhenaten, which you'll find in the videos on here, is the place to go for that. I talk a bit about him, maybe her, probably him, on there. Yeah, folks, I'm going to have to go. Thanks so much to all of you. Thanks, Amy, for the 5-minute warning, which I missed, but I'm there. Thank you all for your questions. I'm sorry not to be able to get to all of them. Thanks so much to all of you for hanging on this long. I can't believe you've all wanted to give up 2 hours of your lives and more to listening to me going on and on. More talks coming. Pyramids in August. How to read hieroglyphs in September. Thanks to you all for coming. Thanks for your support, and I will see you at the next one. Bye for now.